Just a note that for the young children, the class, the Quranic appreciation class, is going on in the library. So for girls aged 7 to 12, if you would like to make your way into the library through the hall, you can do. This evening, I want to actually continue in a theme that we talked about 2 weeks ago. Alayhi salam, Sayyidah Fatima Masuma, peace be upon her, knew and conclude that discussion. I thought that this would be an opportune time because before I go to that, however, I just want to dedicate the first few minutes for the fiqh, the ahkam that we have been reviewing over the last few sessions. And you'll recall for last week we talked about the ruku and the sajda. I want to just format in the congregational prayers, ruku and the sajda, that we should never be going ahead of the imam of the jamaat. Either we do the actions at the same time as him, or a few seconds after he negations. One is that when we go into the state of ruku, we have to make sure that our body is not moving. Right? And so the example that we even gave last time, let's say are coming late into the center, you come late to the Jamaat prayers and you see that the Imam is already in ruku, we'll tend to run or walk a bit quicker to get to the ruku. We have to make sure, Ihram, Allahu Akbar, we then wait the ruku. Further, it's mustahab to put the hands a bit higher, so on the top of the thighs. For the women, it's not recommended. Scholars give the example that you should be bent at such a way that if somebody were to place like a bottle of water on your back, that it would basically be flat so it would not fall off the back. That's the recommendation. Obviously, if you have health issues or whatever, those are exceptions to the rule. But generally speaking, this is the rule. And the dhikr in sajda is subhanallah 3 times in the minimal. Subhana Rabbi al-Azim wa bihamdi. You can recite even 1 time. That's the obligation. Or 3 times subhanallah is also sufficient. The next important point that I want to mention about the ruku is that, and I've seen this happen many times, so when we finish the ruku, it's very important that we stand up straight. Sami Allahu liman hamida, we say Allahu Akbar, then we go into the sajda. Many times I've seen people go from ruku directly into sajda. That makes your namaz void. It invalidates the prayers. Other times I've seen people will get up out of ruku, not even enough time to say a dhikr, and they are back into the act of sajda. So their body was not standing still and stationary, upright after the ruku. That will also invalidate the salat. So what we have to realize is after ruku, we have to stand up, say Sami Allahu liman hamida, for example, Allahu Akbar, make sure the body has become stationary, and then we go into the prostration, into the sajda. When we go to the sajda, for men and women, there are 7 parts of the body that have to be touching the ground. The forehead is number 1, and we know that when we talk about the forehead touching the ground, for the Shia Ithna Ashari, what that means is that the forehead has to be touching something that comes from the earth, which is a natural product of the earth, which is neither edible or can be used as clothing. So, for example, when we use the turba, that dirt from Karbala, because dirt is not edible, it's not used for clothing, and that is the best of things to use to prostrate on is the dirt of Karbala, that is the recommendation. People say, well, what if I'm traveling, I don't have a turba in my pocket, I'm on the plane, I'm on a bus, I'm on the train. Again, the general rule, the general principle to keep in mind is that as long as it comes from the earth, you can neither eat it nor wear it. You can do sajda on it. So for example, a piece of paper, as long as it's plain paper, it's not coated, it's not a printed card with a varnish or finishing on it, you can do sajda on that. What about toilet paper, tissue paper, Kleenex? Because it's natural, paper comes from the ground, it's a tree, it's originally from a tree or recycled paper, you can do sajda on that. But things that you cannot do sajda upon, that again, people I've seen, they do this, is your clothing. So let's say you're praying Jamaat prayers here or at home, and maybe your 1-year-old child comes and runs and takes your turba and runs away. It happens to many of us with our children. Some people think, well, I'll just use the back of my shirt. No, you can't do that. If you find you have no paper with you, you can't, maybe if somebody else is in the room and they notice it, and if they can give you a turba, great. But if you have nothing, then you have to break that prayer in the back of my thumb. I've seen people do this, and they do sajda with a thumb. This also is not allowed. I've seen also people will take their ring, their aqiq or their firoza ring, sajda on that. Again, not allowed. So again, rugs, these beautiful rugs that we have here or at home, we don't prostrate on these. And there's hadith, maybe we'll share with you next time, from the sixth Imam. It has to be created by Allah, again, neither edible or wearable. And sajda, again, 7 parts. The head is the one, the palms are the two palms. And keep in mind here, brothers and sisters, that when I say the palms, I don't mean the tips of the fingers, right? Sometimes I've seen people do sajda like this, where their tips of the fingers are on the ground, but the palm isn't. This will also invalidate our prayers. The palm, this part of the hand has to be touching the ground, right? Both of the palms flat on the ground. The 2 kneecaps have to be on the ground, and the tips of the toes. So the tip of the toes, obviously that means that if you have long toenail, part of the toe which is where the nail would not be there. But we have to be careful that these 7 parts there, it's a recommendation. There's extra thawab from Allah if you do that action. We also, and I'll mention this and I'll go on for the topic for tonight, is we have to be careful that these 7 parts, while we're in sajda, they don't lift off of the ground. Again, I've seen people put up to itch and they put it back. Or they lift their forehead off the ground for a second. Maybe it was, again, and just one clarification between men and women is the men, the palm of the hand is on the ground. We don't put the forearm on the ground, the men. Women should have their whole arm up. As I said at the beginning, I want to continue tonight in the topic that we looked at 2 weeks ago that we introduced, and that was about Marjaiyat. And really, when we look at this concept and we follow a marja, I would personally say that after Tawheed and all the beliefs in Aqaid, Nubuwat, Imamat, Qiyamat, Adalat of Allah, all the usul, the principles, once we've got those down and we understand those, Marjaiyat, or the guidance of a religious scholar, becomes one of the most important topics that we need to understand and we need to study and we need to have to accept in our lives. Now, I gave a lot of examples in 2 weeks ago, so I'm just going to refresh a few of the points. One of the things is that we said is that this concept of marjaiyat that we have today, this is not directly found in the Quran. So if somebody says, prove to me marjaiyat in the Quran, easy answer is it's not in the Quran. But that doesn't mean it's not important. That doesn't mean there are ayat which allude to it, that they speak in generalities, and we'll give one of those verses tonight. If you say, well, go give me a hadith where the Prophet said, do taqleed of a scholar. We don't have hadith like that. Not from the Prophet, not from Amir al-Mu'mineen, not from any of the Imams. Because the premise in Islam has always been that we as Muslims, as believers, we should know our responsibility to Allah. The example I gave 2 weeks ago hopefully solidified that. When I gave the example that when people were living at the time of, let's say, the 5th Imam, Imam Muhammad al-Baqir alayhi salam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. They didn't have a book of Islamic laws they could open up and say, okay, these are the things that are purifiers, these are the impure, najis things. No, they would have had scholars, they would have had companions actually before them who were conveying these teachings. If they had a problem at the time the 5th Imam, is this thing najis or tahir, impure or pure, they would have gone to the 5th Imam and said, is this thing, what is the ruling on this? Right? And that is the trend that continued for the Imams. The 1st Imam, the 2nd Imam, around the time of the 7th, 8th Imam is when things became a bit more difficult, because as we know, the 7th Imam was sent all the way to Baghdad. 8th Imam, even more difficult, being sent to what is now Mashhad, Khorasan in Iran. 9th Imam being sent to Baghdad. 10th and 11th Imams in Samara. And so the connection between the Shia, the Shia and the companions and the masses, the connection was becoming more and more frayed. It wasn't a direct, what they were doing, and although this was there at the time of the Prophet and Amir al-Mu'mineen, is that companions who were trustworthy, who would be able to narrate the hadith of the Imam, they would be learning the teachings of all of these rules from the Imams, and then many times the Imams would send that companion to a particular city, to a particular region, and basically that companion would be the representative of the Imam. he would be the one who would be relating the hadith, that he would say, well, the fifth imam told me that if this happens in your prayers, then you do this. So in essence, they were giving fatwas, but based on the rulings of the imam directly. And that continued until the time of the 10th, 11th imam. Especially the 11th imam being in house arrest in Samara, not having the ability to always freely connect with the Shia, with the followers, is that he had what are known as, representatives. They were people who were businessmen in that region, but they pretended to be, going to the house of the imam in terms of business transactions, let's say selling oil, selling butter, selling commodities to the imam, and they would be smuggling in questions to the 11th imam. They would be smuggling in money to the imam. They would be taking things that the imam wanted, the community to have, that they would smuggle those out of the home under the pretext that they were just traders or businessmen. And this continued for the time of the 11th imam. And then as we know, the death of the 11th imam comes. The 12th imam's imamate starts. He's in what we call the minor occultation, this ghaybat al-sughra, for about 63 years. He has a more organized network, we can say, of 4 specific representatives. And each one was to Allah. We talked about this again, and just as a refresher, that Allah wants you and I to worship Him. He wants us to pray, to fast, to go back to family. How do we know all of these rules? Right? Nobody can come up and say, I'll read the Quran and I'll find everything I want or that I need. Because the Quran is a book of universals. The Quran does not pray, when to pray, what to do if we make a mistake in our prayer. We don't have that in the Quran. So again, when the companions were talking to the imams directly or to the Prophet directly, imam that we can directly access, nor are the companions here that we could relate or ask them what they heard from the imams. This is where our scholars, through guidance in the Quran, and today called Marjaiyat, this guidance, this leadership of a scholar, where they provide the resources for you and I to fulfill our obligations. But the challenge, who do taqleed, people who follow another scholar, Allah actually reprimands them. Allah actually talks bad about them. And we looked at that verse from Surah number 9, Surah Tawbah, verse 31, in which Allah talked about the fact that the people of the book, the Jews and the Christians, some of them blindly followed their scholars. They did what we would call taqleed of their scholars. But they did it in the negative sense, meaning that their scholars were making the halal haram and making haram halal for them, and they did not question their ulama. And the verse says, اتَّخَذُوا أَحْبَارَهُمْ وَرُهْبَانَهُمْ أَرْبَابًا مِّن دُونِ اللَّهِ, that they have taken their monks and their scholars, their religious scholars, as their lords, as the arbab, other than Allah. And some took Masih, Jesus the son of Mary, as a god. And so in this verse particularly, what Allah was saying is that there were people in previous communities who took their ulama to be above Allah. The ulama were twisting their book. They were saying that this is not haram, you can do this. And the things that were halal, they were making haram upon their community. And the followers did not have enough sense of religion. They didn't have enough sense of what they were obligated to follow, that they just blindly accepted what their ulama told them. And so Allah uses this example multiple times in the Quran to show you and I that as Muslims, and especially as the Shias of Ahlul Bayt alayhum salam, each and every one of us, even in this room tonight, we should know at least the minimum basics of our religion. Right? We should know the haram and the halal. We should know the basics of the Quran, of what Allah allows and prohibits in the Quran, so that somebody doesn't come and say, oh no, you can do this in Islam. Your marja just made up a fatwa. Why are you listening to them? That's allowed to do. Or the other way, that they may come and say, no, Allah said that's allowed, but no, you can't do that. You see Muslims today in the world, they say, Allah says, aqimu salat, pray. But we don't have to pray because our Imam of our time, he has said we don't have to pray. They say that we don't go for Hajj. We look at the face of our living Imam, and that's Hajj. We don't read the Quran because we read his proclamations, and that's better than reading the Quran. So Muslims we see today have gone into this trap where they've taken their scholars, their leaders to be arbab, to be gods over Allah. And Allah never intended Marjaiyat, this system of leadership, to be that where the ulama make the haram halal and the halal the haram. They are there to, as I mentioned, to explain the rule him today in Najaf or in Qum and say that this is my situation. Can you make this halal? For everybody else is haram. No, there's one rule for everybody. Right? You may apply haram. That's not allowed. That the marja would never put himself into that situation. So that we should have scholars within our community, people who are devoted to Islam, people who are full-time about the same chapter, which insults people who do blind taqleed, that in this verse, in chapter 9, verse 122, Allah flips the book and he says that no, that there should be people who are scholars, who others refer to, who they do ruju to. They follow them. They get rulings that they have been able to conclude, and they put them in their lives. So what does Allah say? He says in the verse, وَمَا كَانَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ لِيَنْفِرُوا كَافَةً. He says it does not fit the believers that all of them should go forth en masse. So just as a brief background to this verse, in the early days of Islam in Medina, onslaughts of the non-Muslims, of the mushrikeen, and there was a challenge because if all were to an expedition, then two things would happen. One is that if Rasul, then that could cause a problem for the religion because the followers would be obviously getting smaller and smaller in number. Those who would be there to intellectually protect the community would be getting less and less in number. So to support the message in the messenger in terms of jihad fiddin. Not that they study religion, but this word liyatafakkahu, it comes from the Arabic root word tafakku, which translated as ahkam, as the jurisprudence. But the true meaning of fiqh is a deep understanding of religion. So not just haram themselves to full-time Islamic studies, liyatafakkahu fiddin. The people who have to go to the battlefield, they should do that. People who are butchers, deep knowledge of religion. And then what do? Do they come back home and work at Tim Hortons? Do they work at McDonald's? They should come back to their community and warn their people. Teach them what they've learned so that the community get it for hours. But I'm just going to give you maybe 1 or 2 points, which is that we see that in this verse, although Allah doesn't use the word marja, here in Kitchener, for example, in 2019, we need people from our community to go to the seminary, whether that be Najaf and become ayatollahs for the community. No, we need them to become scholars and experts in religion. And you can't become an expert in a year or I shouldn't say Allah wants. Allah expects every community that just as our youth go to become doctors, learning, because you'll be working or you'll be so tired you won't have time to prepare or deliver a lecture that is comprehensible. So Allah shows us that this is a need of our communities. And unfortunately, I would say as Shias in Canada, as my own personal observation is that we have failed tremendously in ensuring that we have scholars within our community. We've unfortunately not encouraged our youth to go. Those who do get a chance to go, we don't support them financially. Those who come back, we don't support them when they're working in the cause of Islam. And unfortunately, that's why we see many of our communities in Canada don't have full-time scholars. They don't have people that the youth, the community can go to for guidance. They have to go and stream majalis every week off of YouTube because there's no scholars in the community. They stream Dua Kumail, they'll stream Surah Yasin. I don't doubt a day will come where they'll ask for a fatwa to stream Jamaat Namaz, and we'll put a TV in the front and just pray behind the television, because we're getting to that level when we don't support scholarship in our community, when we don't encourage and support our brightest to go to the Hawza, then we're going to be left with communities without scholars. We'll have doctors, we'll have lawyers, we'll have engineers, we'll have masjids that we'll spend money on building, but we won't have scholars to run and nurture those centers and bring up the community, a community that's ready to support and help Imam al-Hujjah, Ajjalallahu ta'ala farajahu sharif. And so we have to now move on from this, that we have to realize that we as a community here locally in the Waterloo region and across Canada, we have to really sincerely think about what are we doing for Shia scholarship in our own community. Forget about Toronto and London and Brampton, that's their responsibility. We have to look at our own. Are we building up the scholarship that we need for our next generation? And if we're not, then we have to sincerely put our heads together and come up with a concrete plan and solution to build a network of scholars in this community, in this region, who will be here to serve the next generation of our children, these young boys and girls who are 5, 6, 7 years old today. When they become 16, 17, 18, they need to have scholars of their understanding of Canada and the lifestyle to be able to address their concerns at that particular time. Let me go on to a few other topics as I conclude for tonight. One is that how do I determine a marja taqlid? If I've determined that I can't become a scholar, I need to rely on somebody who has that time, where do I go? Most times we'll just go to Google. Who is a marja taqlid in Canada? Search. And then you'll get a name of somebody in Toronto who claims to be a marja. You get the name of somebody in Dearborn, Michigan, claims how a marja is determined by what Google tells you to, or by what the Toronto Sun or Toronto Star says is the marja for Toronto. Obviously not. And when those people are introduced as marja, we have to be careful. Why are they being promoted over others? And who are they? What are their credentials? Right? Just a website and you become a marja? You have a picture with you with another scholar and you're a marja? That's not how it runs in our community. I give you a very forma. We'll go into Google reviews. We'll Google this restaurant. Do they have good food? And you'll see all the reviews and the ratings, and you'll say, well, this restaurant got like 2 stars out of 5. Why would I want to eat his food? So you'll go and you'll find another place for, is it good quality, whatever. Dedicate more time to their food, what they eat, where they're going to go, what they're going to order, what's the appetizer, what's the main menu, what's the dessert. And we don't spend that much time on our religious knowledge. Who am I going to listen to? What is this ways that we are told that any maraja in this region? So we are not able to use that because we can't determine it ourselves. It's like if I were to ask you who's the best doctor in terms of, a particular illness. You might say, well, I go to this doctor. I heard this doctor is good. But until you ask doctors in the region who's the best, let's say cardiologist or cancer specialist, you and I won't know. We have to find the experts and ask them. And that's where the second way comes in, is that you go and ask 2 mujtahids, minimal of 2, who are adil, who are just, and who have that level of knowledge that they can say, you know what? We know all of the scholars out there today, and we feel Ayatollah X is the most able to fulfill what you need as a believer. He might not know everything, but he has the tools necessary to come up and define our responsibilities. So that's the second way. And the third way is that if a mujtahid becomes so famous in our community that there's no doubt that he's a mujtahid. Right? And you have many of them in Najaf, you have many of them in Qom, you have many of them in many other countries in the Middle East where they are so well known for their level of piety, their knowledge of the religion, all of the other sciences that they need to know, that people will automatically tell you that yes, that person, you can rely on him for your religious guidance. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. I'll conclude the next few minutes with just 4 FAQs, frequently asked questions about Marjaiyat. Again, this is a vast topic. We could spend hours discussing it and debating the pros and the cons, the arguments in favor, the arguments against it. And there are many people who engage in these debates online and in books that are available that debate Marjaiyat and whether it's legitimate. I don't want to go into that debate. I think we all hopefully are mature enough to realize that if we don't know about Islam, we need to go to an expert and ask them, what do I do in my situation? But I just want to pose some questions that people ask and answers that we have. One of the things that people say is that it doesn't make sense to follow another human being. That Marja in Najaf or Qum, he's not ma'soom, he's fallible, he makes mistakes. Why should I follow him? What makes him any different than me, for example? And we have to realize that when I say that I'm doing taqleed of a marja, when I'm following his rulings, I'm not following him in the sense that I wear what he wears, I eat what he eats, I walk how he walks. No, I'm saying that I am using his expert research, and I'm saying that I don't have the time to research, so I'm taking what he has done, and I am saying that Allah, I don't have the ability to get to that level. I'm following what this scholar has determined is right for me to do. And you and I do that every day. We go to the doctor, he gives us a prescription, we go to the pharmacist, we take the medication, but nobody has studied med school at that level that you know what the sickness is. Nobody has become a pharmacist that I know of right now here in this room that you know what medication to take. And if you're a pharmacist, you don't necessarily know how that medication is made, the actual chemical composition of it, but you trust the doctor, you trust the pharmacist, you trust the pharmaceutical company to give you a correct diagnosis and a correct remedy for your sickness. You don't say they're not they're not masoom, I'm not going to follow them. No, you follow them still. When you take your car to the mechanic, he says, yeah, your timing belt is misaligned and you have to do this and you have to do that, and it'll cost you $1,200. Yes, you might take a second opinion, but at the end of the day, if you're not a mechanic, you don't want to crawl under your car, you'll give him the money and you'll let him do the job. Because he's not perfect, he might have made a mistake, but he knows more than you do. And you'll take his word for it, because he has probably fixed a few cars more than you've fixed. So yes, the marja is not fallible. He makes mistakes. He's not infallible, rather. He makes mistakes. He is fallible. He might make an error in judgment. But that doesn't mean that we just throw the entire system out. We still follow them because there's a better chance that they will get us to Allah than if we just try to guess on our own. Number two, people say that, can't I just follow more than one marja? I can go to a doctor and get a second opinion. I can take my car to this mechanic and then get a second opinion at another mechanic. Why not follow more than one marja? Follow him in namaz, follow him in hajjins. And maybe you have a point. And some scholars are reinterpreting this and saying that yes, that is a possibility, that if you are an expert and you can determine out of all of the maraja that this one is the best in determining rules of hajj, you follow him in hajj. If this one is the best in, let's say, rules of salat, you follow him in salat. But if you and I don't have that ability to tell who is the expert, then we revert to one and we follow that one individual in everything that we need until we come to a better solution. And last but not least, and we'll end tonight with this, is the perennial question: can a woman become a marja? Why are all the maraja men? 124,000 prophets, they're all men. Adam, Nuh, Musa, Isa, Ibrahim, Idris, Yusuf, they're all men. All the imams, all men. All the maraja, all men. All of the muhaddithun, the collectors of hadith, all men. Why are there no women scholars? Why are there no women mujtahids? We women want a mujtahid that we can follow. And they've got a point, maybe. It's a debate. I would say, I'll mention this, that it is a debate happening in the seminary today. What is the level that a woman can be? Can she be at the level of a marja taqlid? Without a doubt, a woman can be a mujtahida. She can derive fatwa. We've had, not many, but we've had a few women mujtahids in our time. There's one currently in Qum as well. Her husband was a marja who passed away, but she's a mujtahida. We've had many scholars who were great authorities in Islam. In fact, even the late Allama Tabatabai, when he was writing Al-Mizan, 20-volume commentary of the Quran, and he came across difficult ayat. There was actually a woman scholar in Isfahan, if I'm not mistaken, and he would go and get guidance from her on tafsir of Quran. So women can become scholars, no doubt. But unfortunately, many of our sisters don't want to go that route, as many of the men don't do it. And I would say, I'll end with this, that don't in mind when you